now I almost feel like we're seeing a shift where it's not so much people fear that it'll be boring and dull to get married and have a family, but that it's impossible. That's the fairy tale ending that doesn't happen in real life.
And welcome back to The Narrative. You will know that this is take 2, but we will never tell you what happened in take 1.
We need Mike back.
We need Mike back. That's just the bottom line. It's Aaron Baer, David Mahan here. Going to just dive right in the news off the top. And actually, some pretty serious news from just earlier this week. This is a hard thing to talk about because the news sounds really devastating when you first hear about it, but it's actually going to turn out to be a big nothing burger, right? And that was a Franklin County court struck down the constitutionality of Ohio's Ed Choice program. So this is the voucher program, the scholarship program that serves over 140,000 kids that have been able to escape the ideologically broken and academically corrupt public school system. And this is a litigation we've been talking about for a long time. This was the outcome we expected to happen in the Franklin County Court. They specifically chose this court because they knew they could win here. It was an ideological judge. It's in a court of appeals that is also very ideological, I should say. But ultimately, it's garbage arguments that the school districts and the teachers unions made to block this program. The good news from it is the judge stayed her decision. So she said, yes, the program's unconstitutional, but I'm going to allow the program to continue on while my decision gets appealed. So that's the good news. No families are going to be affected. At the end of the day of all of this is going to be a bunch of lawyers that have been paid for by your tax dollars. Let me just make this clear just so everyone understands. This is public school districts, so taxpayer-funded schools suing the state to get more taxpayer dollars from you and to get kids out of private schools. So that's a whole other line of corruption here. All that to say, awful decision in Franklin County. We're not panicked about this. The Attorney General Yost has been doing a phenomenal job arguing this case. I was literally talking to his attorneys that are on this case just yesterday, and it is what we thought it was going to happen. And the good news is the decision stayed. No kids will be affected going into this fall. And ultimately, we know we will prevail. But just a reminder, don't forget to vote for those judges on your ballot. They matter a lot.
Yeah, and I think the voters have already voted, right? I mean, they've already got a taste of what it is for their kids to actually go to a school that actually educates them.
Yep.
Again, there's no going back. I just came from Dayton. I was speaking in Dayton over the weekend. 70% of those 3rd and 4th graders can't read proficiently. 75% of their high schoolers. You can't. That's already been let out of the bag. That cat's out of the bag. So no matter what they do, folks are not sending their kids back to Babylon. Right. But yeah, like Aaron said, don't worry about it. I know. The director of Ohio Christian Education Network was just talking to we represent about 50,000 students across and a lot of folks are concerned. But again, nothing burger here. We expected this was going to happen, and when it gets a little further up out of Franklin County.
Right. Oh yeah. No, exactly.
Well,
and the thing to me, Dave, about this is it's not just like bad legal arguments. The idea of kicking 140,000 kids out of their schools, and it's actually more than that, because a lot of schools would just shut down if this happened, yeah. Right? They wouldn't be afford to continue to operate if this program shut down, because most families just don't have the money. They're paying a lot in taxes already. They don't have the money to be able to afford private school. Now, that's not the only reason why we want school choice. It's not just about the money side of it, but that's a practical reality. So you'd be talking about hundreds of thousands of kids being displaced by a decision like that. And the heartlessness, that's the thing I just keep coming back to. These teachers unions, these school districts, all they talk about is how much they care about the kids. But you don't do this if you're caring about these are Ohio kids too, whose families pay taxes, who want to have a good future, whose local public school districts in a lot of cases are getting tens of thousands of dollars and are failing miserably. Tens of thousands of dollars per kid, I should say, and are failing miserably. And yet the teachers unions are still pushing to abolish the program. And the biggest thing I'll just say here is, while we're not concerned about this, this is just a good reminder at some point that the teachers unions cannot allow competition to stand in the space, and they're going to continue to fight against this program, and it's why we got to stay vigilant in this process. But it's not all bad news. And again, ultimately, that's going to be nothing news. There is some really good news. We do indeed have a final state budget. Right? Big news. Big work done by this man right here. He looks pretty awful, right? I mean, you look tired.
Oh, man,
I think haggard is that the right word? Grayer, I'd say for sure. But but big news on the budget today.
Kick a man while he's down.
Exactly.
Right here on the narrative.
But what's the good word on this budget?
Good stuff. This is 3 years of budget work here in the last 6 months. Yeah. Big win for the pregnancy centers across the state. I mean, you have $20 million in OPP money there.
That's the Ohio Parenting and Pregnancy Program.
Pregnancy and parenting.
Not the other OPP.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know.
Yeah.
Anyway, but go on.
And he's dating himself there. Now, and then, we've got money for, I think, $2.5 million for ultrasound machines and tax credits.
That's $2.5 million a year.
A year.
So it's $5 million total for ultrasounds. Yeah.
It's just been it's amazing there, and then also just requires some good reporting, annual reporting, some quicker reporting on abortions in the state of Ohio. One of my favorites here is the annual reporting on high potency THC. That's a critical piece. If we can't show harm, we can't get good policy. And so now every year we'll see really good data related to what are these products doing to the unborn, to the pregnant women, how is this affecting IQ and young people. And so I think that'll help really create a lot of guardrails. We got a cell phone ban, so kind of finishing what DeWine started years ago. This is now mandating that not only do you have to have a policy, it has to be a policy prohibiting the use of cell phones in the classroom by students. I think we're going to see some great impact from that.
I mean, that's one of those things that Jonathan Haidt has written about. I think that his data is something like if you could improve test scores tomorrow by 15% in schools and not have to spend a dime, wouldn't you do that? Yeah. And that's the power of just taking cell phones out of schools. I do want to, again, this is the second time this year, and I'll probably reach my quota on this, of complimenting David. He mentions the THC reporting requirements in there, and this is one of those really in the weeds things that people don't get. So we had been pushing, since they legalized marijuana at the ballot a couple years ago in 2023. We've been saying, hey, we need to go and tweak this law. It wasn't a constitutional amendment like the abortion amendment. This was a initiated statute. So it's actually something that the General Assembly could actually repeal this, right? They have the ability to, and we're encouraging them to repeal the law. Understandably so. They aren't anxious to repeal something the voters just did, even if I think the vast majority of folks at the State House do oppose legalized recreational marijuana. But we do have the ability to tweak the program, edit the program some, and put some reporting in. And that's why we were really pushing for reporting in this budget, so that we can make the case to voters, hey, this is not, it's what David talks about all the time, this is not the weed from the 70s, 1870s, that's when you were, for the 90s, sorry, I know. The mic's not here, so I get the mic all the time here. But this marijuana,
all I do is love this, man. Just keep getting.
Is far more dangerous. I'm getting to a compliment. If you give me a minute,
we'll get there, dude.
I'm getting to the compliment. Well, this is just a little bit of the ways that the swamp works around the State House. Is okay, yeah. Let's do reporting. So the first language we're seeing on reporting actually has the industry do it now. Again, and it doesn't say the marijuana industry is going to do the reporting, but it's written in a way that sounds innocuous enough, sounds nice enough, but when you drill down, you realize this is who's doing it. And so again, David goes and starts talking to members about this and looks at what other states are doing and say, hey, actually, there's great law enforcement. We don't want the money to do this report. That's not what we do. We're not the experts in this space. Let's have a neutral arbiter do this, which is law enforcement. Right. Look into it, and that's a big change that CCV advocated for, that David really spearheaded over there, so that now we're going to have a true story to tell that's not sugar-coated, that's not trying to make the marijuana industry look better than it is.
Not just looking at suicide ideation, but completed teen suicides. One other one that is kind of floating under the radar here, prohibiting taxpayer dollars being for youth shelters that promote or affirm gender transition. This has been a problem that we've been watching for about the last 4 or 5 years here. Is that, when you talk about the exploitation that's happening, the coercion that's happening, a lot of it is happening through these youth shelter programs. And then the other piece that's even bigger than that, no Medicaid dollars to mental health services that promote or affirm social gender transition. That's not just with minors here. This play is just period, so even adults. And so that was a big ask and a big win there.
I gotta say, I think CCV Comms does a really good job of getting things out. But yeah, this is why I like to be subscribed to all of our opponents' emails to the opposition, because sometimes, they just write our content for us. So Equality Ohio put out their alert about what's bad in the budget, and I was like, yeah, this actually turned out. Yeah, we didn't really have to go through and do all of our digging. They did our research to see what budget provisions made it in and what got pulled out. But, they talked about how we defunded these transgender shelters. We banned LGBTQ materials for minors in public libraries. Oh. They said this is just such in crazy language, their email. The budget inaccurately defines gender as only binary. So...
but what does it mean?
But... Wait, so we are inaccurately defining gender. Indeed, there are only two sexes. I think that's what they were getting at with that. We banned insurance coverage for gender transition for minors. And this is the funniest one. These two last ones are pretty funny. We banned menstrual products in men's restrooms in state buildings.
Sorry, Aaron.
And last, we banned all but the state flag from flying at government buildings, including pride flags. So only, and actually I think they said only the U.S. flag, the Ohio flag, and the POW-MIA flag that could be flown, but no more pride flags, no more other flags flying out there. So yeah, a pretty. Thank you, Equality Ohio, for that quick summary for us. And again, so much other things in there. The $20 million for fatherhood initiatives, that stayed in. Just really a strong budget and a good example of what can be done. And this is. Ohio has a 2-year legislative session that never ends, but this really accounts for probably 60 to 70% of the policy that gets done in a 2-year stretch. It comes in this budget. It's the most important thing our lawmakers do. We didn't even mention the flat tax made it in.
Yep.
The flat tax made it in, which the Christian Business Partnership was a big advocate for, and they didn't expand gambling to pay for it.
That's right. VLTs or iGaming.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a huge win. Well done across the board. Got to shout out Senate President Rob McCauley and Speaker Matt Huffman, House Finance Chair Brian Stewart, Senate Finance Chair Jerry Serino, all good friends of CCV and of the family, and excited about where this is going. Process-wise, we're recording this on is it Thursday or Wednesday today? I can't get on a Wednesday. They will be voting this out today. It'll probably get sent to the governor by Thursday or Friday. He has 10 days. He does have a line item veto. I don't see any of this stuff getting vetoed. Maybe some other things around the edges, but this is a really good...
Maybe the vending machines.
Yeah. That is a good place to end. We have Some great conversations coming up. We will be right back here on The Narrative.
Hey, Narrative listeners. You know, Christians in the marketplace today face more unique and challenging threats than ever before. Businesses are following woke capitalism, chambers of commerce are beholden to social justice, and secular activists are chipping away Christians' First Amendment rights. As Ohio's only Christian chamber of commerce, the Christian Business Partnership stands in the gap to advocate for, to educate, and to celebrate Christian business owners. Joining the partnership also allows businesses to provide their employees with healthcare insurance, workers' compensation, and exclusive banking and educational discounts. To find out more and to join, go to cbpohio.org. That's cbpohio.org.
Well, and welcome back to The Narrative. Aaron Baer, David Mahan here with a very special guest with us today. We have Nathanael Blake, who is a fellow in the Life and Family Initiative at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, good friends of Center for Christian Virtue. We've had their president, Ryan Anderson, on the podcast before. Dr. Blake has published hundreds of articles at outlets including Public Discourse, World Opinions, The Federalist, the Catholic World Report, National Review. He lives in Virginia with his wife and children and is the most recent author of the book Victims of the Sexual Revolution, How Sexual Liberation Hurts Us All, published by Ignatius Press. Nathanael, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Well, there's a lot to unpack on this book, and it really ties into things we've been talking about at CCV for quite some time, especially in relation to our Hope in a Future report that we did with the Institute for Family Studies and Dr. Wilcox. But I guess, how did you come to this topic at this time right now, Nathanael?
Well, I've written on these issues for a while now in different places, and it just seemed that there is a renewed, or perhaps a new hunger for a renewed appreciation for critiques of the sexual revolution. We're seeing secular criticisms coming from the likes of Christine Emba, Mary Harrington, Louise Perry, getting attention and traction. We're seeing The Atlantic a few years back admit that we're having a sex recession, as they called it. The New York Times had a Democratic administration Surgeon General write a piece saying that there's a loneliness epidemic. New York Times also published a piece warning about how porn-induced kinks, such as sexual strangulation, are becoming increasingly common and increasingly dangerous. So there is a willingness to admit that something has gone wrong in our culture, but there is not yet a willingness to fully unpack the problems of the sexual revolution. A lot of people want it to be kinder and gentler, but they're not ready to abandon it. And I think in that, Christians have an opportunity to step and say, look, we're not the killjoy scolds. We're not just a bunch of hateful bigots. Instead, Christian sexual morality offers a better way to live that is for our good and the good of those around us. And so that's the theme of the book. That is the argument of the book that I make. And I'm hoping that this will encourage and equip Christians to step out and boldly proclaim the truths about the human person that are part of our understanding of marriage and family and sexuality.
So there's a lot to unpack there. I want to start just on the happiness question, because you wrote in the excerpt that you guys published at EPPC on your website. You wrote about the decline of happiness. You said, this ode to solitude would be more persuasive if sexual liberalism were delivering on its promises of happiness. If the declines in marriage, childbearing, and family stability correlated with increased personal happiness, end quote. And you said, and the truth is the reverse. What are we seeing now? What are we, say, 50, 60 years into the sexual revolution? What are we seeing about the promises of the sexual revolution, where it's actually left us in America today?
So we're seeing a few things, none of them good. One is that the sexual revolution has not even delivered its promise of great sex. If there was one thing it was supposed to give Americans, it was lots of great times in the bedroom. But it hasn't. Again, we've got The Atlantic, hardly a bastion of Christian conservative social critique, saying there's a sex recession. And they're saying that because it's true. The data shows Americans are having less sex, they're less sexually satisfied. And that's because Americans are disconnected from each other. Men and women are alienated, and they're increasingly not in stable relationships. And so this is where we see the lies of the sexual revolution as broken promises, where instead of the happiness and authenticity and flourishing we were promised, if we just got rid of the old norms, the old obligations, we are stuck in a culture now where people are lonely and unhappy because we are made not for selfish pleasure seeking, but for relationship. We are meant to be in communion with other people. And family, of course, is one of the deepest forms of communion, of relationship that we can be in. So when that disappears, people end up being less happy, less fulfilled, having less meaning in their lives.
Doctor, I really appreciate your work and the work of many, like you that have kind of, delved into the error behind the sexual revolution. But you used the word here, the victims of the sexual revolution. When I think of victim, I think of somebody that, something has happened to them beyond their control. I work with young people over the years extensively. They don't appear to be victims, right? Like they are enjoying themselves. They just don't see the end results. Maybe as they get older and we start, okay, they're not sexually satisfied, things of this nature. But they're diving headlong into this culture of basically, sex without consequence. And you call them victims, though. How did you come up with the word victim in reference to culture?
Well, our culture loves to talk about victims, certainly, but we don't talk about the victims of our sexual behaviors. We'll talk about the victims of anything, poverty, capitalism, war, crime, whatever it is. But we will not talk about victims of a sexual culture that is harming people. And I would challenge you a little bit. I would say a lot of young people I don't think are very happy. I think if you look at, say, the data on young women, they're doing well academically, they're doing okay economically, but relationally, in terms of mental health, how many people are on Prozac, especially young women?
Oh,
That
yeah.
doesn't bespeak happiness or fulfillment to me. And I think part of it is because they're pursuing happiness in a way that is self-destructive. So, yes, there is a certain pleasure to sexual indulgence initially, or at least there often is. Although for some young women, it just, when you have young men who are taught how to have sex by porn, the young women might not even enjoy it.
Right, right. I'm with you 100%. It's that pursuing piece, right? Because even in their unhappiness, it's like the more unhappy they are, the more they pursue, this empty dream of, it's just about fake relationships, fake intimacy, this fake persona of happiness, even though your data and so much data like it says that they're the exact opposite. It's difficult to change culture when everybody seems like there's nothing wrong with it, right?
Well, or at least, yeah, everyone has to at least pretend
Right.
that things are okay. It's stigmatized, I think, to be a young person, especially a young woman, and to say, I'm not enjoying this. So they'll pretend along. I mean, right, we make fun of the Victorians for lie back and think of England, but I think there are a lot of young women in particular doing that now. And I think there are a lot of young men who find themselves a lot lonelier, a lot less fulfilled sexually and relationally and emotionally than they thought they would.
I'll let Aaron speak to the Victorian piece of this, but what about Diddy, right? So we've got we got Diddy, Sean Combs out there, and people are literally seeing really what this emptiness, as it plays out in his life. We saw it with Hugh Hefner years ago. He was supposed to be this big icon of sex and just humanism. And then, realized that, he wasn't even able to be with all of these women in the house. Diddy the same thing, beautiful woman. He's watching her being with other people. It's this situation with Diddy is kind of like a glimpse, this generation's glimpse into, again, what you're saying, right? That there was not happiness on the other side of this fake persona that he was putting out to the whole world.
Yeah, there's a lot of glamour that it goes into selling the illusion. And it is remarkable how many people who sell this at the time eventually are revealed to have not enjoyed it that much, or to not have been as virile as they appeared or whatever. I mean, you can talk about like Paris Hilton, for instance. Younger people might not know her, but a decade or two ago, she was a symbol of sort of the party girl, airhead heiress. And then eventually, a few years back, she said, actually, I spent my 20s and sex was a chore. I didn't enjoy it. But she was out there selling this ideal of, attractive, promiscuous party girl lifestyle. And yeah, Diddy, same sort of thing. And we just see that again and again where the people sell it, promote it, but a lot of them aren't enjoying it. And I think when you get down to away from celebrity to ordinary people, that's often even more true. Yeah. Because a lot of, at least celebrities can usually find someone to sleep with. But a lot of people, how many 40-year-old men who are single because they believed that they could just go from relationship to relationship indefinitely are now just alone.
The Diddy question here, I think, is interesting because it reminds me of, like, for me, that there's so much awfulness in that situation. But one of the aspects to me on this was that the Diddy story was that the final nail in the coffin of the failure of the Me Too movement, right? Because here you had, again, another Hollywood celebrity who was on every single show with every single, talk show host who talked about how we need to do better and the hashtag Me Too stuff. Why? And I'd say the Me Too movement failure. Maybe you don't agree with this question, the very premise of this question, but it seems to me like the Me Too movement was a failure. And why was it? Or do you disagree with that?
I would say it largely failed, insofar as it didn't do much to restore right relationships between men and women. It critiqued and exposed some men. There were also some, potentially false accusations, but it didn't do anything to say, how should men and women relate? It just said, this is clearly wrong, but it didn't even have the language necessarily. One of the things that you'll see on college campuses in particular is all sexual wrongdoing gets called rape or part of rape culture, but that's not really accurate. It's just that we've lost the vocabulary to talk about things like sexual exploitation other than through the lens of consent, right? We can't talk about, old words, a man being a cad, for instance, or seduction. We don't, but these things that talked about these words that showed us some manipulative aspects of sexual wrongdoing, we've lost that vocabulary. And now it's just a matter of consent or not consent. And so we've actually lost the ability to discuss sexual wrongdoing outside of just, did she say yes or no?
I always ask the question, how do we get here, right? I mean, we got the sexual revolution, but I was just probably about an hour ago listening to a hearing on our success sequence legislation, Senator Alcatrona, and there was only a couple, opponent folks up there, but their whole issue with the success sequence was marriage, right? They don't have a problem with kids graduating high school. They don't have a problem with kids working a full-time job in their 20s. It's just the piece that says marry before having children that gets them all stirred up. And literally, I watched an hour of opposition hearing just around, the marriage piece. Now, I understand, why, some would oppose it, but culturally, how did we get to the place? How did it start to where marriage was, even in many of our fatherhood programs across the country, yeah, you can talk about fathers, but you can't talk about husbands, right? Because that's related to marriage. Where did that come from and why?
I think it's because we thought we could get away with it as a culture. We were increasingly wealthy, increasingly technologically savvy. So the pill seemed like it was going to take away the risks of unwanted pregnancy. Penicillin seemed like it was going to take away the risk of dying of syphilis, and so on. And so all of these hazards of promiscuity seem to have gone away. And so then the natural human impulse to try to break the rules, grab a little more, enjoy yourself comes out. The problem is those weren't, one, we didn't deal with those hazards as well as we thought. And two, those weren't the only hazards, right? So yeah, the success sequence is incredibly important to understand how and you guys are doing great work on this, but how the problems of our culture, poverty, poor education, all of these things are linked to poor families, broken families, family structures that are not conducive to children's well-being. I mean, the best anti-poverty program, the best anti-crime program, the best education program is intact families where children are being raised by their married biological parents. And you guys know that, and I applaud your work to promote that. But the resistance to that is that if we admit that as a culture, then we have to reconfigure our entire sexual culture in service to that. People have to subordinate their own relational and sexual desires to the good of children in particular, to the good of the next generation. And a lot of people don't want to do that personally for selfish reasons. And a lot of people are very ideologically committed to the idea that, no, we instead need to be autonomous people, adult desire comes first, and to do anything else is somehow an infringement on my own humanity even.
So, Nathanael, you've now twice brought up different medications. You brought up Prozac and kind of SSRI type things earlier, and then just a little bit ago, you just brought up the pill. I want to dive into a little bit here. How we view medicine and how sort of the way whether it's the sexual revolution has changed how we view our bodies and viewed medicine, or the way we view medicine changed the way we view sex. How is medicine in sort of the medical space, and especially just the ability to just take a pill for anything, change the way we perceive the world around us and even perceive what's possible?
Well, that covers a lot. I would say that I would actually tie this into another issue that I write about, which is transgenderism, and that overall what we are seeing in a lot of ways is a change in our understanding of medicine. Instead of being about restoring natural, healthy bodily function, which presumes a normative anthropology, it presumes that we know what it is to be a natural, healthy body looks like. Instead, medicine is becoming a collection of techniques. The doctor is simply a technician who provides for the desires of the patient. So this is very clearly seen in the question of gender ideology, transgenderism, where we have people trying to basically become a facsimile of the opposite sex. It's impossible, but medicine promises, well, you can do this. And even though it's harmful, a lot of doctors will go along because they view their role as providing what the patient wants rather than what will make the patient healthy. So then when it comes to our understanding of things like the pill or psychiatric medications, there is this tendency to think that medicine's job is simply to provide what I want, and surely it can provide that. And if it can't, something is wrong and we just need better medications. And we do away with the human component. I'm not arguing that there's never a place for psychiatric medication, but it certainly seems like we've allowed that to substitute for self-control, for going to church, for forming relationships and communities. Those are a lot. I think a lot of people are lonely because they're not doing that. They don't need antidepressants. They need friends.
Yeah, you bring up the transgender piece, and I will touch on that just a little bit to make another point or ask another question. I never thought we'd see the tipping point that we're seeing now, where the transgender issue is a 70-30 issue across the country, not just the state of Ohio. Do you see a cultural tipping point on marriage, family, biblical sexual ethic, or just the nuclear family? Do you see a tipping point happening in culture, or is one even possible if you don't see a tipping point yet?
I would say I don't see it yet, but I see the possibility for it, because I think with transgenderism, what really did that was there were obvious injustices. There were obvious people being hurt by it. So from women in prison who are being raped by men who are now being put in women's prisons, to the fact that female athletics is being destroyed, and to the children.
Transitioners, yeah.
Yeah, going after the children in particular. People didn't realize it was happening. And then when they did, woke up and they got angry. I think with the sexual revolution and family in general, it's harder, but I do think the fact that it is so obviously not working for people at a broad cultural level will allow us to at least have the opportunity to make our case as Christians that no, there is a better way to live. Christian marriage, Christian family are good for us. They're not just, it's not just an idiosyncratic religious observance, some ritualistic thing that we Christians do just because. It's not an arbitrary thing. Rather, this is rooted in human nature, the natural order that we are meant for, and it promotes flourishing and well-being. And I think we can make that case, and maybe by God's grace, we might have a tipping point on that as well.
I want to go back to the conversation you were having a little bit, and this is one that makes, again, CCV as an evangelical and Catholic organization, this is a conversation that can make some of our evangelical listeners a little bit squirmish, but I think we often don't talk about the role that contraception has played in the sexual revolution. Could you talk a little bit about that and why it's something, the Catholic Church broadly has been really clear on the issue. Now, again, a lot of Catholics still use contraception, but on the actual ethics of it or concerns with it, the Catholic Church has been really clear on this. For a lot of evangelicals, like where I come from, there's not been a lot of conversation about this. It's just sort of seen as a miracle or a good thing, or not, maybe a morally neutral thing. Can you talk about how essential contraception was to the sexual revolution?
Sure. So simply in the sort of historical terms, contraception allowed for sex without apparent consequence, that was the dream for a lot of people, that you could do what you wanted and you wouldn't have the natural result of a child tying you down. You wouldn't have that obligation. So in that sense, it's very obvious. In terms of the theology and the ecclesiology of it, in terms of how different Christian denominations respond, it's a little complicated because I'm an evangelical PCA Presbyterian with a book out by a Catholic press. I work for an organization that's evangelical Catholic and a few Jewish scholars as well. And my wife's Catholic. So personally, I am very critical of contraception. And what I would ask evangelical listeners to do at this point is not necessarily go out and throw your pills away right now. I mean, I'm not going to try to persuade people to do that, but I will say, please give it some thought. Think about whether God's understanding of, from Genesis, be fruitful and multiply, to Psalm 128, it's talk about children as a blessing and all of these things. Does the biblical understanding of children comport with the extremely casual acceptance of contraception in evangelical culture? And should Christians be marked by a much greater willingness to have children, to want children, to desire children? And has the evangelical tendency to view contraception as almost automatic become something that is harming us culturally?
What's interesting about what I hear you talking about too, Nathanael, on what do we do about the sexual revolution? A few weeks ago, or maybe months ago now, I was at a meeting with folks talking about marriage and how do we restore marriage, and there can sometimes even be amongst the pro-marriage folks a little bit of hesitancy to lean into Christianity as the response to the sexual revolution. You write very clearly in this excerpt I read, and even just now as we're talking, that the antidote to the sexual revolution is Christianity. Why is that? Is there a secular way of turning course away from the sexual revolution? And if not, why? Or if so, why?
I'm inclined to say yes and no, because the truths that Christianity proclaims about marriage, about the human person made male and female, our complementary union, and all of these are not truths that are exclusive to Christianity. They are part of our nature. They are written in our essence as human beings who are embodied. So, yes, it is certainly possible to have a secular realization of that is not Christian. It is possible to make these arguments in secular terms, which is a lot of what I do in the book. Most of the arguments I use aren't explicitly Christian. However, I think the Christian understanding of the human person is such a strong, it provides such a strong motivation to follow through. So abortion is a great example of this. You don't need to be a Christian to see that abortion is evil. We can all see it. This is the age of ultrasound. We can see the little humans with their little arms and heads and legs moving around. We post the pictures on our social media and take the printouts and put them on our fridges. We know. And yet somehow it is still faithful church-going Christians who are the strongest bulwark against abortion. And that is because we don't just know, but we are called to follow through. We have the process of sanctification spurring us on to not only recognize the truth, but to live it out and to try to enact it broadly in the culture. So that's an example of how you don't need to be a Christian to see these things. But it is hard without that Christian faith for a lot of people to follow through.
Yeah, that's. I think sometimes when we're talking about these issues, we can get caught up in like in your book and some of the writings you have. And again, I think about Brad Wilcox on this. There's so much good data to show that a healthy sexual ethic, a righteous sexual ethic, whatever sort of secular terms we would want to put it in, is good for your overall happiness. But you present that data to a 16-year-old boy, and I say this as somebody who, as a teenager, did my fair share of messing around. It wasn't until I made a profession of faith in Christ that it got me to turn away from a lot of impulses, right? And a lot of, bad decisions. Having gone through all of the, all of the DARE classes about smoking and drinking and all those types of things, it took that sort of powerful draw of the Holy Spirit and really a capturing of the social imagination of what the good life looks like, sort of a reframing of what the good life looks like that made those decisions that of denying yourself, denying your impulses, denying sort of immediate gratification possible. And it seems trying to go after those ends, I at least systematically. Yeah, there's a handful of Louise Perrys out there who can kind of construct a logical proof and find themselves knocking on the door of the Old Testament and eventually Jesus. But for most people, I feel like there needs to be that higher draw, the higher power,
I would definitely agree with that. But the other concern I would have is that I'm afraid that we're losing the historical context of what it looks like to do what we're saying do, right? Like, I remember I had a shirt and it basically said, "You're not a man because you loved a million women. You're a man because you love one woman a million ways." I got that quote from a senior in an inner city school in Cincinnati who told a story about how he would go spend the summers with his grandfather. And part of the manhood talk was not just being a man, but what being a husband and a father, the role they played in that. And 200 seniors who were rowdy and crazy, and we were having a talk around, sexual ethic. They were, just speechless, and then they all broke out into applause. I think there's a seed of faith in every one of us that has that righteous desire to be a father, to be a husband, to be, in a family. But the historic context, I think we're losing it with, 72% of African-American kids growing up in homes without fathers. We just don't have the models to help turn the tide or start that tipping point. That's my main concern.
And that's the problem. And I do think that is where the church has to be very deliberate about trying to step in and provide those models, both, particularly for neighborhoods and groups that need that more, but also even for those that seem to be better off. We're just seeing a decline in the belief that this is possible. It's right. Looking back, it seems like the culture for a long time would say, you don't want to get married and settle down. You'll disappear into suburban life and it'll be boring and dull. Now I almost feel like we're seeing a shift where it's not so much people fear that it'll be boring and dull to get married and have a family, but that it's impossible. That's the fairy tale ending that doesn't happen in real life.
I literally had a state rep say exactly what you just said. I sat in front of him 3 weeks ago, was talking success sequence again, and he told me, Dave, for our, I'm not going to mention the city, but for our constituents, his constituents, it's just not realistic. I
got House or Senate because I'm just trying to guess who it is here. I was going to say
House.
Okay, all right.
Cleveland. All right, so but that's heartbreaking to me because again, those are the leaders we need to help create that tipping point, right? And when you've got the media, when you've got leaders who are whatever this thing is that makes us, hate marriage and even mention marriage, even if you're married. Right, we've got leaders that won't even talk about, use the M word. Our own fatherhood commission only mentions the M word like one time, and it's in reference to a divorce on their whole website. So like you need these leaders to echo what it looks like, the value, and model it. Not just teach it. I don't know. I know God can do anything, and. But this is a tough one to see it turn.
It is. And we pray, we work, and we trust God. But I do think that we can make the argument, at least people are open, especially younger people, to seeing it as something beautiful, at least. Because marriage really is. It is foundational to civilization. Men and women coming together, having more children. That's literally how civilization keeps going. And,
Right.
the diapers and the dishes and all those mundane tasks. But it also is something that is incredibly, remarkably profound and romantic. I love that T-shirt you mentioned, because marriage is not just, it is self-effacement, but it is self-effacement in a glorious struggle to overcome yourself, to be true to what you have promised, right? These vows are incredibly meaningful, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer.
And it gives us a context, like especially for men, to funnel, what could be seen as a negative into a positive, protecting, providing, just that every day putting it down for that family to make sure that they can have maybe what they didn't, their fathers didn't have. There's so much beauty to, like you say, to it. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe I need to sell more shirts so we can start a media campaign.
With your fat laces along with me.
That's right. Well, we got 20 million in
That's good, right? Yeah, that's right. So, Nathaniel, just as we wrap up our conversation here, when you wrote this book, when you decided to head down this journey, who did you have in mind that you're trying to reach here? Like, who are the people that we need to be convincing today on this the sexual revolution topic? Where does this need to really start with?
I mean, ideally, I want to reach millions of people, but assuming I have to narrow that down, if I could pick just a specific target, it would be, I'd want to get this message to every campus minister, to high school teachers, to all those lay leaders, or in some cases, campus, I guess they are ordained, but all those people who are the Christians who have felt a bit besieged by the sexual revolution, who are the ones on the front lines, answering the questions, explaining the ideas, and seeing the harms that are caused by this. They're the ones dealing with confused young people who aren't sure what it means to be a man or a woman, or with young men who have learned about sex from online pornography and don't know, they know all the worst sexual actions, but they don't know how to ask a girl out on a date, right? Those are the people that I want to help. I want to equip them and encourage them in the hope that that will help be the tipping point, that I'll make my own little contribution to that.
Oh, that's good. It's funny. I've joked even at my own church. We have a lot of young women from Cedarville that go there, and there's a couple of young guys from Cedarville or other that go there, and they're shy, they're quiet, they're not asking anyone out. I'm like, guys, get in there, go like, all these girls want to get married, and you're just like sitting over here quiet, It's a thing. It's real, and something that I think even in our churches we don't talk a lot about. And so, Dr. Nathanael Blake of the Ethics and Public Policy Center, this is a meaningful contribution to this conversation. Appreciate the work you do. Other than going on Amazon and buying the book, or going to Ignatius Press and buying the book, how else can folks connect with you?
Well, they can go to EPPC's website, look at my scholar page, and they'll see all the various articles and things. And they can also find me on the website formerly known as Twitter, and Blake EPPC. Yeah,
I will have to have you back sometime to talk about the 10 years since the Bergefell have proven its critics right. So that's a whole other fun conversation for another time. But appreciate the work you do, sir, and we'll look forward to having you back on The Narrative sometime.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Narrative, presented by CCV and produced by Wessler Media. If you found today's episode insightful, leave us a review or rating and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. We're your hosts, Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, and David Mahan, and we'll see you next time on The Narrative.